I think as most of you that watch Ohio play can see that was probably our best game of the year. So we're moving certainly in the right direction, but we're coming up against the part of our schedule where the next 4 games will tell it all. And if you look at all those teams that will be playing, they're all in contention for a MAC championship still at this point. So they're going to be very, very competitive football games. First 2 are on the road, with one of those being with a 5-day turnaround. Then the last 2 at home. So there are certainly a lot of challenges ahead for us. But I like the direction that our football team is moving right now, and we'll take them one at a time and see what happens.
You guys ran the ball all over the place, and a big part of that on Thursday was A.J. Ouellette. He's now just the 5th back in program history to break 3,000 yards. We've asked you some variation of this several times, but did you have any inclination when he first got here he was going to have that kind of staying power, that kind of long-term impact to your program?
No, I don't think on the day that he arrived that we necessarily felt that way. It took us about 2 weeks to get that figured out, you know, because he obviously came as a walk-on, and we put him on scholarship very, very quickly after it showed that he was a scholarship player. You know, he got a lot of those yards the tough way in terms of really looking for contact and going into contact and getting those yards after contact. I think he's changed his running style a little bit, and that, you know, he's looking to make cuts, and when it's necessary to go into contact, he's certainly glad to do it, and still continues to do it very, very well. But I think he's making some bigger plays now by making quick slashing cuts, getting to the linebacker area and not just taking on a linebacker or a safety that's filling the hole, but making guys miss. And I think is helping him in terms of his body being able to hold up well, and so far this season. So a little bit of it is, you know, his personality is to go into contact, to look contact up. But I think what he's doing is smart football right now, and it's making him even more dangerous, because there is points, and there is a point in time when he needs to go into contact. He certainly still does that.
You mentioned the tough 4-game slate you have to end the year, and it begins on Thursday at Western Michigan. Besides your club, they're probably the best running football team in the conference. What do they do well with their run game, and how similar or how different are your 2 offenses in that regard?
I think they're somewhat similar in that I think both teams feel they've got a very good offensive line, and if you're gonna be at the top of the MAC or close to it in rushing offense, then you better start with that. And then, you know, we have certainly quality running backs, and we have more than one, you know, and we utilize our running backs. Certainly A.J. and Malik both get a ton of reps, so neither team is relying on just one running back. I think both teams have quarterbacks that can pose a threat as throwers as well as running the ball, and so that always helps in your running game stats also.
If you mentioned this a month ago, you get deeper into conference play, and you look at conference numbers. You know, forget the non-conference part of it. Mm-hmm. Well, if you look at conference-only numbers, your defense is one of the top 3 in the league right now. Could you highlight or reinforce what you're seeing in conference play that is allowing that unit to take strides or move forward or perform the way they have?
Well, we've traditionally have done a good job against the run over the last so many years, and I think we're continuing to do that. Our rushing numbers might be up a little bit, but they're still good numbers. I think where we've made a great deal of progress has been in the pass defense game, and I think that's attributed to, getting a lot of young quarterbacks playing time early in the year, and I think they've come around and are playing really good football now. And then combine that with the experience of the safeties, and it gives you a very good secondary at this point in time. Linebackers always come into play, stopping the run, stopping the pass, but we have we had somewhat inexperienced linebackers coming into the season, and I think they've gained the kind of experience that's needed to play both the run and the pass well now. So I think it's a combination of just young guys getting better with experience, and then defensively we have a football team that's capable of moving well, and I think we're showing that in the last so many games where we've done a little bit more line stunts, a little bit more blitzing than maybe what we've done in the past.
You've won in every stadium in this conference except one. You know which one that is. What is it about the setting there? Why have you guys had difficult time stitching together good football performances at Kalamazoo?
Well, they've had good football teams, really good football teams. They have a history of having good football teams there. So whenever you're trying to build history, you're not just automatically going to go in and get things done at the level you'd like to. But in saying that, we've had some chances against them, but they've played very, very well against us. I don't have an answer to that other than that needs to get remedied, and ideally this year is where that'll take place. But we'll see. They're an excellent football team. I think we're a really good football team, and I think it'll be a great football game.
So much of this season has been about setting up for this final 3.5 weeks, these final 4 games. You've mentioned it several times, all your assistants, your players. Too many times the last 8 years or whatever, games in November have slipped away. What is it about the way you've approached the first 2/3 of the season that have you feel good about your club's ability to hold up down the stretch?
Well, I think every year in the MAC is different in terms of how things fit for you in conference play. You just you just don't know until the given year as to how many games you're going to have that are less than the normal 6 days between games. When those games come about, when your bye week is, which can play a role when you're playing games under 6-day breaks, and so every year is kind of different. There's a few years there we should have gotten things done. I don't think there's any question about it, and we just didn't do it. We got another opportunity here. We'll see where that goes.
Coach, you talked about having chances against Western Michigan. The last time you guys had a chance was that 2016 MAC championship game. Mm-hmm. It may seem a little bit long ago, but there's plenty of guys from that team that are on this team this year. Is that something that you talk about with your team? Is that something that you keep in the back of your head maybe when you're watching film this week?
Yeah. No, it really isn't. This year is a year in itself. That game was a really good football game. We had our chances, and there was 2 really good football teams. But that's really in the past. These guys have a tendency to really look forward, and because it was a heartbreaking loss against Cincinnati. Because we certainly had a huge chance there for a win, and they did not hang on to that. They moved forward from that, and so there were a couple others. A lot of games have been decided by very close margins, and so I don't think that has any effect on this football team at all.
Last week, Toledo had a lot of success against Western Michigan, passing the ball and running the ball. They were a pretty balanced attack. You like to have your offense more of a power running offense. When it comes to week 9 or 10 of the season, do you really take into account the success other teams have had against Western Michigan, or do you just kind of stick to everything that you know and not really focus on that?
Well, first of all, I see myself and our staff as wanting a balanced attack. But I will say this: if we can run the ball against you, we're going to keep running the ball, and so we're not going to start searching for other things to do when we're having success with something. And so a balanced attack is really what we're after. There's some interesting stats that are out there right now in terms of where we're at in the country in terms of throwing the ball, in terms of 10 yards or more, 20 yards or more, 30 yards or more, and some other stats that are mixed in with that really shows the effectiveness of our passing game. So we don't think we're one-dimensional at all. If we have to throw the ball 30 times a game to win, I believe this club can do that. So we try not to be one-dimensional, but if they're going to allow you to just put up yards and points, and with one of those dimensions, then you probably ought to stick with that.
Coach, you guys have won 4 or 5, 2 dominant performances on offense and defense over the past 2 games, and you've talked about the kind of quick turnaround between the game against Ball State and this upcoming game against Western Michigan. Is it could it be a bit of a blessing maybe for the team that they get to continue to stay on this roll and get right back to game action in less than a week and be able to kind of continue that momentum that they've carried over the past 2-3 weeks? How do you feel about that?
Yeah. Well, this game with Western Michigan, we get the full allotment of a week. Mm-hmm. My feeling is if you're on a roll, it's always good to keep going.
Yeah.
I think you can be on a roll and have a break in the middle of the season, and it doesn't necessarily work out for you. So that part of it just is what it is. You just try to build around your football team in terms of where they're at health-wise and what kind of practices you need to have, and just try to fit it and make it all work together. And sometimes things work really well. Sometimes you can have some injuries that kind of take you out of having your best football team on the field. But a lot of it is in the mindset too, as to how your players and coaches accept quick turnarounds. It's where our no limits comes into play. And I think that's huge. Our guys really don't even think about it, and coaches do, but I don't believe our players do. They've never mentioned it once. I've never heard a complaint. I've never heard anybody say, "Man, what bad luck we got. We're playing 2 games under the normal time frame." Mm-hmm. Nobody's said a word. Nobody cares. So we're just out to win football games, try to be smart with our approach, and give our guys the best chance. I know they'll give a great effort, and that's all you can do.
14 points given up against Ball State, and it seemed like the catalyst on defense was that front 7, getting pressure consistently from the kickoff to the final whistle. 2 sacks, 6 tackles for loss, 10 quarterback hurries. You touched on it a little bit with Jason's question, but what have you guys done differently on terms of kind of unlocking that defensive line's ability to pressure the quarterback and make some plays in the backfield more recently?
Well, we've given them some help in that we don't just have them playing static defense. Mm-hmm. It's not just a 4-man front where that's what they're doing. And we're relying on stopping the run with the 4-man front. We're relying on stopping the pass with a 4-man front. We have mixed it up very, very well. And I think that has been huge for us in terms of helping us play better defense. And I mentioned this before, we're a team that runs pretty well. And when you have guys that can run, there's no sense in having them stand still all the time, So we're trying to create a lot of movement with some of the concepts that we do on the defensive side of it, and I think that's been a plus for us.
Coach, better than anybody that Kalamazoo is one of the toughest places to play in the Mid-American Conference. Is there anything during the week that you guys are going to simulate to? Because, It's one of the loudest stadiums in the MAC. Is there anything that in practice you guys are going to try to do to simulate that and in practice or anything like
Yeah,
that?
you know, we generally, week after week, simulate crowd noise. When we take our offense, we have a somewhat of a split practice one day a week where we take our offense indoors and we crank up the music in there. And so, you know, we always work on that. It never comes down to one game's going to be loud all of a sudden for us. You know, we try to work it so that we're prepared for it no matter what happens in any game. And, you know, we don't really truly use a snap count for the most part. We're clapping a lot, and you know, we've not had a problem with that. So I think, you know, we're set. I don't, you know, we talk about this from day one in football. You know, never let the fans take you out of a game. You know, I mean, that's something that should never happen. You know, and if you look at the history of our school, we've played in some really loud stadiums, against some Big Ten teams that, and you know, we've, I think, handled it very well. So we're not all of a sudden going to try to do something unusual in terms of our preparation. I think we'll be okay with all that.
And then this has been talked about earlier, but just knowing that these 4 games pretty much dictate where you guys want to go, is there any difference, like feeling in the locker room or anything like that? Just kind of just knowing that, hey, like, guys, these 4 games pretty much say, like, tell like where our season's going to go.
Well, I think, you know, a couple of weeks ago, it showed to us that we're a football team that's going to rise to the occasion, and so we had really good practices. You know, after coming off a loss, the next couple of weeks of practices were really, really good, and so I think our team is set to give their best, and that you know, that's something that in the middle of the season or towards the end of the season is not always the case with some football teams. You know, but regardless of whether they have a chance to be in the running for a conference championship or not. But I, from the start, as I mentioned to you guys, I like the personality of this football team. I like the leadership on this football team. They've been great, and so I don't see that tailing off at all.
Coach, you guys have rushed for over 800 yards in the past 2 games, and offensive lineman Joe Anderson was on the coach's show with Russ talking to him about how they wanted to hit that 400-yard rushing benchmark as a group, but it still feels like, I don't know, it just feels like you guys haven't hit your peak in terms of the rushing game yet, despite that top 10 overall number put on in the game against Ball State. Does that crew still feel like there's a level that they can still reach in the rushing game that can eventually lift this team to that MAC title heights, so to say?
Yeah, well, you know, that's a pretty huge number right there. You know, so I don't know that they're saying, hey, you know, we need to get 500 yards, or we need to do this, or we need to do that. I think they just want to be the running team that they can be, and if they do that, if that's what they're all about, and they're playing at that level, those numbers are going to be there. Now, the competition dictates, you know, whether that's even a realistic figure. And we're going up against one of the best teams in the MAC, certainly one of the best defensive teams in that regard. So, you know, we're not necessarily going into this game saying we're going to run for 400 yards. What we're doing is just going into the game and wanting to have, as always, a balanced offense, you know, where we can run the football, throw the football, and put points on the board. And it's not about yards, you know. This game is not about yards. It's not about rushing yards, passing yards, total yards at all. It's about points and how you get points on the board. And there's a lot of things that enter that picture.
You had a couple really substandard weeks in terms of turnover ratio. Anything click in that regard the last 2 times out and getting that back on track?
Yeah, well, the emphasis has been heavy on it all year, but, you know, whenever you're losing the turnover ratio, that really becomes a point that we emphasize in meetings we emphasize on the football field in practices, and you do anything you can to eliminate. We're talking about ball technique to our running backs and receivers almost every play. If I'm standing behind them, and if you can see the ball as a running back coach from behind when you're standing behind the play, you let them know when they come back. So you're constantly coaching that phase of the game. Making good decisions with quarterbacks, good ball technique with running backs and receivers or anybody that's handling the ball enters into it, and then getting the turnovers enters into it. If they have 4 turnovers, the team you're playing, and you have 2 or 1, maybe you live with that 2 or 1 that day. As long as you're winning that turnover ratio, and we'd like to win it by 2, that's our goal. Then you give yourself your best chance of winning. And I think our whole team understands how important that one statistic is.